Oh, geez, I can't even stop for a cup of tea. Hello, team. Welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video. This is a Ukraine War update extra video, giving you extra tidbits and nuggets to get your teeth into to give you a greater understanding of the war in Ukraine. Where should we go to first? Well, let's visit some War Translated, Dimitri at War Translated, giving us a flavor of the tensions, and reporting from Ukraine did a video that touched on this between different PMC private military companies that are operating. And we're starting to see not just Shoigu, the defense minister, having his own private military company, but Gazprom as well. The utilities company, the hydrocarbons company in Russia. So I think the Kremlin changed the rules to allow Gazprom to have their own kind of security forces, their own PMC, effectively, and they even appear to be on the front line. So Dmitry says Gazprom's PMC unit, Potok or Stream, is reported to have conflicts with Wagner. Potok fighters complained to Putin. They were attached to Redut, so that is the Shoigu's one, and sent to replace Wagner's positions, but were forced to retreat under Ukrainian pressure. For this, Wagner threatened them with shooting. So this is, as I say, this is what reporting from Ukraine was reporting on. So here, let's just go through this video, see what they say. I'll enlarge it. Comrade, Commander-in-Chief. Today, on the 20th of April, appealing to you is the personnel of the Volunteer Battalion Potok Stream, which was formed from the internal security of Gazprom. Leadership of Gazprom assured us that we will sign a contract with the Russian Forces Ministry of Defense, but the personnel of Potok were forced to sign a combat task contract with OO Redut. After entering the Special Military Operation Zone on the 3rd of April 2023, Wagner PMC personnel abandoned positions at the contact line as the leadership of Potok took positions under its command. On the 17th of April, as a result of an attack by the Ukrainians at the positions of the Potok Battalion, 2 positions were lost due to a poor supply of ammunition, lack of mortar fire cover, irresponsible actions of Potok Battalion leadership. So it appears that they're complaining about their own leadership as well. Wagner's command, upon finding out about this situation in an aggressive form and with threats of reprisal towards Potok personnel, blocked the withdrawal from the contact line and forbid rotation, and is not allowing the personnel to the safe zone. Wow. The main problem with PMC, so this is going on to Prigozhin. The main problem with the PMCs that exist today is that, so he's talking in this guy, in order to dilute PMC Wagner so it wouldn't be one big power that can play some role in internal politics. That's first. And secondly, everyone keeps saying there will be a fight for power. Everyone needs a private army. So the people with money now think it's a cool idea to start a PMC. Thus, the Gazprom PMC Potok, which we call a blue Potok, I'll explain that in a second, PMC Bokareva, PMC Redut, every creature comes in pairs. So he's pretty dismissive. So that's his kind of retaliation to those claims. Now, here a Wagner mercenary talks aggressively about Potok, accusing them of cowardice and abandoning weapons and positions, calling them a Goluboy Potok, blue stream. So that's kind of what Prigozhin was saying. Most likely to characterize them as homosexuals. Goluboy refers to homosexuality in Russian. DRO equals dryer hole. So this is another video. We'll drop into this one and see what this guy has to say. So this is a Wagner PMC guy complaining about the Potok PMC. What can you say about today's situation, is asked of him. Yesterday, we took wood lines on the western side of Bakhmut. The enemy is totally not sparing its forces, constantly bringing up new reserves. 20 to 30 people per hour. The work is taking place 24 hours a day. Neighbors who stood in our flanks are so-called DRO Potok, that's the stream guys. The Gazprom PMC, which our director spoke about, they abandoned their positions at full strength at night. dumped their weapons and effed off from there like effing scum. So we have to cover the holes with our own forces. The blue stream leaked. Very good. Let's see what we did there. So that was, there are complaints about Blue Stream from Wagner, complaints about Wagner from Blue Stream. And here, captured mercenary, says Dmitry, from Potok, so these are the Gazprom PMC, also explains that Gazprom created a number of other units such as Fakel, or Torch, and Plamya, Flame, which were attached to the Ministry of Defense. He was dumped on the battlefield by his comrades and was lucky enough to reach Ukrainian positions. Let's dip in and see what he has to say. Okay. So back to the beginning. Introduce yourself, please. Name, and he gives his name. It's not given. It's not translated there, obviously, for reasons of war criminality and that kind of stuff, and POWs. Born 1975 from Orenburg. Who did you work as? Senior security at Gazprom. So he's a senior security guy and has now ended up on the front line, which is in itself pretty interesting. So sorry, didn't keep have some issues here. Who are you now? I am now a contractor at Reddit PMC. So this guy is not actually a Gazprom guy. He is now working as a contractor, as a mercenary for Shoigu's Reddit private military company. Reddit PMC, how did you get in there? Gazprom created a Potok unit that was attached to PMC Reddit. So the Gazprom mercenaries were attached to Shoigu's mercenaries, kind of a subcontractor to a subcontractor. If you see, goodness me. Where were you training? Tombov City? Which grounds? Trigulia i Dve Pushki grounds? What other units were created by Gazprom? Fakel, Torch, and Plamya, Flame. Where are these units attached? Are they also in Reddit? No, they were transferred to the Ministry of Defense. We were the only ones in Reddit. Tell us about your last combat. Last combat, mortar shelling began. I was in the position. Mortar shelling began. I was wounded. I requested evacuation. I was bandaged. On the radio, they said I needed to be evacuated. At 7 p.m., they started evacuation. 2 were carrying me. Then they abandoned me on the field. So they said they'll scout the situation and return. They left but never came back. I was left alone. I crawled around the forest for 4 days looking for where to go. So I reached you. The Ukrainian positions? Yes. And that's the end. So that's fascinating. 4 days he's crawling around and then was captured, perhaps luckily so. Russian reporters Loy Moriachok explains that Potok PMC battalion explains what it is and how it suffers from the same issues as any other battalion, a volunteer battalion or BARS, that's a reserve battalion. The situation with the Potok PMC, the guys from which, due to a lack of ammo, left their positions near Bakhmut, not the first and not the last time. I'll put in my 5 cents since I know the scheme of their supply well. 1, this is not a Potok PMC, but a Potok battalion, which is another BARS, that's your reserve troops. Accordingly, it is characterized by all the issues BARS, which I wrote about earlier. All the BARS issues, all the issues that reserve forces have. 2, the Potok Battalion is one of 3 volunteer detachments of Gazprom. 3, I confirm that the problems with weapons, equipment and ammunition of the Defense Ministry are not being solved at all. Gazprom, on the other hand, is not resolving issues with the material and the technical support. The fighters themselves buy fuel and resupply at their own expense. The Potok Battalion signed a contract with Reddit OO LLC, essentially becoming Shoigu's PMC tampon. And that's pretty much that. So there's some kind of confusion or disagreement. I'm not quite sure as to whether they're reserve units or a full-on private military company. And Dmitry says, as per the video in the second tweet, Prigozhin is critical of Gazprom's initiative as he sees it as a threat to his own authority with Wagner. He openly talks about large companies creating PMCs to secure themselves in case things go sour in the Russian political landscape. Just fascinating. The whole situation with creating private military companies. So I guess, what does this tell us? Does this support the position or the hypothesis that everything's going really well for the Russians. They've got everything under control. They have enough troops. The war is going in their favor, and strategically going forward, they look to have planned everything out so that they have the most successful outcome. Or does this better support the hypothesis that it's a complete shit show? And I would guess that it actually supports the latter. Personally, I can't see that having a situation where you're trying to win this war and you're bringing to bear a bunch of competing military mercenary companies because you can't seem to recruit enough people, and you're still using a doctrine of sending in human waves and sacrificing people in soldiers in the most horrendous of ways at times. I just think this just is indicative of the mess that Russia are in. I really do. Not only do Russia have sort of competing military districts, so they kind of split their forces into regional areas that operate on the battlefield in different places, but they also have, as I've said, I'm repeating myself because I've said this many times. So they have DPR and LNR, or LPR, DNR, LNR, whatever. Your militias, essentially, from the Donetsk and Luhansk People's Republics. So that you have them operating within this sphere of these different military districts, and then you have things like within those military districts, you have things like the VDV, the airborne troops, and then you have Spetsnaz, and you have all these different components of your regular military. But then you're throwing in what looks like 2, 3, 4 different military contractors. And then some of them, then you've also got reserves, and then some of these military contractors might well be reserves and not quite but they're being subcontracted to other military contractors who are themselves being supposed to do the work that the conventional military really should be doing. But then you've got military contractors trying to replace other military contractors, and you have internal, like, semi-political battles going on between people like Shoigu and Prigozhin and the Russian MOD and PMCs. And it's just, oh my goodness, how can you conduct an efficient, successful, strategically astute operation when you've got all this stuff going on and all these different components of your war machine? It's not even to mention the Navy and the Air Force and all the different components. It's difficult enough as it is. I mean, you look at the organization of the coming counteroffensive for the Ukrainians, trying to put like those 9 to 13 brigades together, or whatever the numbers are, with all of that equipment, all of those different types of troops, all the different types of training. I mean, organizing armies is difficult enough. And then you start throwing in all of this claptrap. And no wonder Russia are in the mess they are in, honestly. So Twitter, I could spend so long moaning about Twitter and how it's going south. And in fact, I've literally just written an article on the latest debacle. So my latest article is the blue check debacle rears its ugly head again. Just about how, and this has actually some pertinence for what we're talking about now. So we are in the midst of a hybrid war being conducted by Russia. And in hybrid warfare, information is a currency that is incredibly valuable. And disinformation is equally valuable to sides who want to perpetuate its mass infiltration into our minds, right? So Russia will be attempting to disinform us at all times. Well, what's happened is, so this is a bit of a sidebar, but it is super, super important. So what happened is Elon Musk came along and bought Twitter. He wasn't going to buy it. He pulled out because he realized actually it wasn't a good idea. But then he was forced to buy it because it would have been cheaper to buy it than not to buy it, because in entering into buying it, there was some kind of contractual arrangement that if he pulled out, he would have to buy it at this kind of rate. And so therefore he didn't want to pull out because it would have cost him loads more. So he ended up actually buying it in the end. And he's saying, right, I'm going to be a free speech absolutist, and I'm going to say basically we're not really going to have moderation because I'm a free speech absolutist. It means people can say what they like. But of course, if you have places where people can say what they like, then people are saying disgusting things and horrific things all the time, right? That may sound brilliant to people who love free speech, but actually we're getting onto this whole free speech debate again, which is like, would you let your 5-year-old watch pornography on TV, on terrestrial TV at 2 PM? Do you think it's acceptable that swearing takes place all day long on television? So your kids can turn on the television and there's racial insults and swearing all the time? No. So that's moderation. We have moderation for our television because we know some places it's not great to have that kind of views being thrown out. If you want to go and look for those views, if you want to go and watch pornography or listen to swearing or be really racist, there are places that you can go and do that. But for these big public spheres, do you know what? It's not great to have that happening all the time. In the same way that you wouldn't send your kid to school expecting that other kids in the classroom would just stand up and shout and scream at the teacher at some point and swear at them and racially abuse them. At some point, you say that's not acceptable. We don't do that here. Like, if you want to go and do that, go away somewhere else and do that. That's moderation, and actually, moderation is really, really important. We want places where we would like to be. Now, in the terms of Twitter, it's kind of a big public open space. So if you want to be incredibly racist and horrible, we know these views exist, right? We're not stopping you saying them. Just don't say them here. I don't want to go on here onto Twitter and see those views proliferate, those really horrific views. And so what advertisers have said is like, we use this space for advertising. Now, if you're going to allow all these people that have been previously banned back onto Twitter, I don't want this big argument, or they didn't ban these people, they did ban, just the general principle. If you're going to allow like the worst views on Twitter, then these advertisers say, well, we don't want to advertise here, right? And this is our freedom of speech, and this is our freedom of the ability to advertise where we want. And if you're going to do that, we ain't going to advertise here. So what happened is Musk said, I'm a free speech absolutist, and then all these advertisers pulled out. And it actually had a massive black hole in money. So then he's like, oh, sugar. What do? I need a load of money. Twitter's budget is looking, our balance sheet is looking really dodgy. So he's like trying to work out ways to do money. And one way was to sell the blue tick. Now, what was the blue tick? The check mark. Blue check mark was a verification of who people were. So if an organization said, hey, we are the United Nations, and this is our official Twitter account, then they'd do some verification. Twitter would do some verification, say, yep, tick, they are the United Nations. If you are LeBron James, you are that person. If you are, I don't know, Rishi Sunak or Joe Biden or Donald Trump, you get a tick by your name, right? You are who you say you are. So therefore, disinformation is more difficult because there can't be people pretending to be you because they won't get the blue tick, right? And what Musk said is, okay, right, instead of that, you're gonna have to buy the blue tick. In other words, there's no verification. You can just buy your way to claiming who you want to be. And he started it at like $20 and it came down to like $8. Okay, $8 a month and you can have a blue tick. And then everyone's like, oh, what? So then people started buying blue ticks and pretending to be people like Eli Lilly, and they put these tweets out about saying we're going to give away insulin for free and whatever, and something like $15 billion was lost off the stock valuation of Eli Lilly and company, right? And so people doing this, and it was all just scams and craziness, and some of it might seem quite funny to some people. It's actually quite dangerous or quite financially harmful, or all this stuff happening. So then Musk went, oh my goodness, okay. But then he doubled down, right? And then there was this idea that, okay, you're going to pay for your blue tick. So actually, you're not verifying anything. All the blue tick means is like, I'm paying Twitter $8 a month. That's all it means. And some people, if you have the blue tick, you get longer tweets or whatever. But there's nothing to do with verification. So then he said, right, I'm going to get rid of the verification tick. So these are called legacy check marks. Legacy because it had gone on before. And then he took over, and he's like, those are your legacy check marks. So you guys have got this. So whether you're, whatever human being or organization you are, you get these legacy checks. and we're going to phase them out. And so then people stopped having these legacy checks, and then other people were buying their check marks and then pretending to be these people. And then, so in terms of disinformation, this was ripe. So what you've now seen apparently is a propaganda. I mean, you can check this in my article, lots of links to all sorts of stuff, but there is, you're now starting to see propaganda surge from Russia and China. They are taking advantage of this situation where no one can tell who they are. So then Musk has actually gone back and said, okay, you can have legacy check marks, and then there's, you now got a golden tick for organizations, but then that's also, you've had Twitter then accidentally giving the golden organizational checkmark for free to someone pretending to be Disney, and it wasn't. It's just like, verification and moderation are really important. They are really important. They're like swear words to some people who see themselves as free speech absolutists, but there is no such thing as sensible free speech absolutism. It's just a nightmare. It's just a free for all. So you have to have some kind of guidance and moderation to get you to a place where everyone wants to be, because that kind of free speech absolutism is a great place for people who just want to insult other people. That's really who benefits. Who benefits most from free speech absolutism are the people who just want to slag off other people and do that in public and get away with it. Be as nasty and horrible as you can to as many people, whoever you want to be horrible to, and say, hey, but it's cool though, because that's free speech, right? But actually not everyone wants to exist in those places. So if you want to create a place that is enjoyable for the most people as a business model, you want a place that's enjoyable for the most amount of people, then you are going to need some kind of active moderation. And the problem is he came in and sacked all his moderation staff, and it's a really big problem. There's a really great video that talks about, I'm sure I've linked it here, yeah, that how Musk had no plans for moderation. This is Pod Save America, but actually it's to do with who they interview, who's a guy that editor-in-chief Nilay Patel of The Verge, who's like a bit of a tech guru, and he talks about how it's all about moderation. Everything, when you go to all different websites, they moderate in different ways, and they curate their they curate for their audience a kind of moderated space to be, and moderation looks and feels very different, and it can take on very many different forms. But free speech absolutists will say moderation is a bit of a swear word, but it's actually why you go to different places, because they moderate for, you know, I get rid of people on my threads who just come on and viscerally insult me for no reason, right? Like, if you're going to come here to my house, open my door and just punch me in the face or insult me at my door, you ain't coming in my house. So this is my YouTube thread. I really value difference of opinions, but if you're just going to come and insult me as another human being just because I'm pro-Ukrainian, you can jog on, mate. I don't have the time, I don't have the energy to put up with you swearing at me and calling me a lie and all this stuff, because I wouldn't do that in real life. If you came up to my face and did that, we'd get into a fight, or I'd shut you out. Get away from me. So moderation is super important, and we all do it. Anyway, the point being that this whole situation with Twitter, and when I use Twitter so fundamentally for what I do as being an agglomeration, an accumulation of information, and it is the best place on the internet for this. Like, there's everything, because all the organizations, all the journalists, all the politicians, all the international media, everyone is on Twitter putting their content on there. So I don't have to go to here, to there, to there, to there, to there to get all my information. I can go to one place and get 90% of it, or it gives me links to other places where I then go and get the source material. So Twitter is super important. And if you're doing things to Twitter that then make it more easy to disinform your audience and make it easier for say Russians and Chinese here, or anyone really, to use disinformation for nefarious gains, then we're gonna have a problem. So I have a problem with where Twitter is going, and it is directly as a result of what Elon Musk has done. Now, I know there'll be diehard Elon Musk fans who would just have a go at me for just daring to have a go at Musk, and and as I keep saying, human beings are complex, right? They can be genius and amazing in that place over there and doing that thing over there and doing that. That's amazing. Well done. But in this thing here, numpty, right? One of my very good friends is a massive Elon Musk fan, and you know he doesn't like it so much when I have a go at Elon Musk for what he's done for Twitter. But yeah, he's amazing at SpaceX and at Tesla. Okay, fair enough. And there'll be people who disagree in certain ways about those claims even. But, you know, great stuff over there. Here, not great. Let's be nuanced about this. This is an information space, and it's super damned important that we get trustworthy, verifiable information exchanges. And yeah, I'm desperately close to ranting, so I'll move on now, right? To get back to what I was saying, what I was supposed to be saying, which is this guy's special Kherson Cat says someone doesn't like it when Russian Scooby-Doo vans are exterminated. So Twitter has, there's been a complaint to Twitter. This isn't so much about Twitter. In fact, Twitter have done a pretty good job in saying that actually, no, this isn't a problem. But someone's complained, a Russian bot, no doubt, Twitter is required by German law to provide notice to users who are reported by people from Germany via the Network Enforcement Act reporting flow. We have received a complaint for the following content from your account. And this is the tweet. In the tweet text, the mass extermination of Russian Scooby-Doo vans by Ukrainian FPV kamikaze drones continues. And that's what the complaint was, about the destruction of the Scooby-Doo vans. I've reported on that. Someone obviously doesn't like Scooby-Doo vans being exterminated. So anyway, that prompted my big Twitter rant. Okay, let's go and spend a bit more time and energy looking at this new strategic paper or set of papers that come out concerning the Baltics. I talked to you in the news video this morning about this. These are really enlightening. It gives you a really good sense of what Russia are like. I mean, it's well in line with what we know they're like, and well in line with their kind of doctrinal approach to international politics. They've done these have been leaked out, such papers, strategic papers on Belarus and Moldova, and Michael Weiss and Holger Runemer have done articles on Yahoo News about those, which I've shared with you, and they were fascinating. And now the Russian presidential administration strategy documents for Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania have been leaked, and they show, as it says here, show a Kremlin that's out of touch with the realities in the NATO and EU member states at its doorstep. Right. Let's have a little look at this. So just to remind you of the geography, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, these are the Baltics. They're called the Baltics because of the Baltic Sea that is next door, which Russia has access to here, and also at Kaliningrad, which is an exclave, which means that it's a kind of an enclave that's outside of it. So it's an exclave. So that's Kaliningrad. So it only has access to the Baltic Sea through those small areas. Now, if these Baltic nations are not fans, and if Finland and Sweden are part of NATO, then actually the Baltic Sea starts becoming untenable for Russia to use, which then shows you how important the Black Sea is, and Sevastopol. Because you take that out, then really they're relying on cold water ports in the north or the other side of Russia. And cold water ports, they freeze over and things get difficult. So, yeah, the Baltics are important neighbours for Russia. Now, let's go on to what I highlighted. So it says, among other things, the documents show Moscow's intention to thwart the construction of NATO military bases, weaken the local democratic governments, expand Russian cultural and linguistic influence, and bolster pro-Kremlin political organizations. But in a running theme throughout the documents, which were drafted in 2021, so that's before the war started, Russia's subsequent invasion of Ukraine has undermined almost every aspect of the plans. Estonia Prime Minister told Yahoo News it's Russia's classic playbook. Many of their tactics are taken straight from the KGB. The documents were drafted by the Russian Presidential Administration's Directorate for Cross-Border Cooperation, which formulated similar plans previously revealed by Yahoo News for the creeping annexation of Belarus and the toppling of Moldova's Western government. Despite its benign name, the Directorate for Cross-Border Cooperation is staffed by Russian intelligence officers and the three main spy services, the FSB, SVR, and GRU, respectively representing the domestic, foreign, and military agencies. The Directorate's real agenda is bringing nations back into Russia's sphere of influence. It goes on. A European intelligence source described the Russian presidential administration as a kind of think tank that, in addition to drafting Russian foreign policy prescriptions, also decides on the conduct of disinformation campaigns, ways to weaken pre-existing ties between the and among allies. Quote, the Baltic papers are not about gaining influence in the respective countries, the source told Yahoo News, speaking on a condition of anonymity. They're rather a containment policy to prevent Russian influence from dwindling any further. Few in the Kremlin, the source added, really think that the Baltic states can be brought back into the Russian fold. A more realistic plan would be sowing internal opposition to keep them from slipping more completely into the Western one. Now, when you talk about hybrid warfare, when you talk about the information campaigns of Russia, quite often it's about not just actively sowing discord, but it's throwing so many narratives out there that there's just confusion. And if Russia can then provide the solution to this confusion, then perhaps that might mean people would align to their cause, would be the hope. But there's certainly, discord can come from not only being told that things are bad about these people here, or this country, or this organization, or whatever, but just through confusion, just a natural kind of discord. The piece continues, and a quote here from Dan Fried, the former US Assistant Secretary of State for European and Eurasian Affairs, says Russia's plans to gain leverage over Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania remind me why their NATO accession was such a good idea. Without Baltic NATO membership, Russia would have invaded by now. With Baltic NATO membership, the Russians are reduced to cheap political intrigue. There are quite a number of ethnic Russians in these Baltic states. Estonia is home to about 300,000. Latvia has about 471,000, and Lithuania has 140,000, even though it's the most populous. But I think opinions have been changing in the Baltic states about Russia, especially in light of the war. Nonetheless, these are prime countries for this kind of Russian information activity. Estonia and Latvia both recently adopted language reforms that will gradually bar kindergartens and schools from teaching in Russian. At the same time, both countries have kept the door open for extensive opt-in Russian language and culture classes. So Russian language, and this is what we've seen in Ukraine, is a really huge tool that Russia uses to advance its narrative. So it spread lies in Ukraine about how Russian speakers, it's illegal to speak Russian, and that they're persecuted, and it's all complete nonsense. But there's this idea, you see interviews with people in Russia with indigenous Russians saying, complaining about how you're not even allowed to speak Russian in Ukraine. And of course, that's complete nonsense. But they use that, and you get people like, again, to talk about Elon Musk and Trump and other people who then are regurgitating these claims that these people speak Russian as their main language, so therefore they are Russian, so therefore they're pro-Russian, and that's just nonsense. I mean, I interviewed Anna on my from Kharkiv on my YouTube channel, and she's a Russian speaker, doesn't speak Ukrainian, but is entirely pro-Ukrainian, just completely anti-Russian. So it's just absolute nonsense that you can divide the nation along linguistic lines. However, the Russian information space, that is really prevalent in that landscape. So to counter such efforts, Russia's Estonia strategy, the article continues, directly calls for the, quote, propaganda of Russian culture, including the cultivation of children and the training of, quote, talented Russian-speaking youth in Russian universities. Analysts and intelligence officials have long argued that language and culture are integral to the Kremlin's compatriots policy, by which Moscow claims for itself the role of patron of the world's ethnic Russians and Russian speakers, and which it believes has the right to defend by military means. And this is exactly what I'm talking about. You guys in Ukraine, you speak Russian. Russian is the main language you use. Therefore, we're going to militarily come and represent you by invading Ukraine so that it can be part of Russia. You are part of Russia because you speak Russian. And it's just not so. It's not as easy as that. Otherwise, the British Empire would still exist, and Australia, uh, New Zealand, and indeed, what's that other country? Oh, the United States. Yeah, they would still be part of the British Empire. And I know you all want to be, but just because you speak English doesn't mean we can't control. It doesn't mean we can control you and all that kind of stuff. But this is it. Part of the Ruski Mir, the Russian world approach to politics and, I guess, control. A medium-term goal for Latvia is the quote opening of a school at the Russian foreign mission in Riga as a potential centre for the implementation of a set of measures to maintain and strengthen the position of the Russian language, literature, culture, and education in Latvia. And this includes obtaining intelligence information and conducting research on the possibilities of influence, working with agents of influence, including providing financing to various individuals and groups in Europe to use as a lobby for Russian interests. The statement read, the Kremlin's interest lobby is often carried out through economic interests and businessmen whose activities are related to Russia. So this was the Latvia's Constitution Protection Bureau, Foreign and Counterintelligence Service for Latvia. This is a statement from them saying that, what the Russians would be trying to do, be getting businessmen to lobby using cultural and historical organizations to lobby and spread that influence, working with agents of influence, as they say. Another explicit aim of the Russian documents is to prevent, quote, the establishment of NATO military bases. Don't. In Latvia and Lithuania, national air and army installations in the Baltic countries host troops and units from NATO allies on a rotating basis. But since Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine last year, the alliance's footprint has only grown in the Baltics. The number of allied troops in Estonia alone is already near 2,000, and the US sent an infantry company equipped with the HIMARS rocket system to Estonia just before Christmas. The next goal in the documents is the creation of the conditions for, quote, weakening the influence of the Western countries in the military, political, trade, economic, and humanitarian spheres, which is, pretty much all spheres, and, quote, counteracting the attempts of anti-Russian Estonian political forces to falsify history. Falsifying history in this context refers to Estonia's memorialization of its loss of independence in 1940 following the Soviet annexation, its heroizing of Forest Brothers, or anti-Soviet partisans during the long years of occupation, and its celebration of reclaimed independence upon the demise of the Soviet Union in 1991. In other words, when these countries, in this case Estonia, finally found their independence, they would obviously, it would be a case of amplifying those national cultural characteristics and history, and saying, hey, this is us, we're not part of the Soviet Union, this is who we are, and amplifying that. And of course Russia is saying that's just false history, in the same way that they're trying to annihilate Ukrainian history and identity. That is what they would like to do here, although it's much harder by doing it from afar, so they're having to use all these nefarious ways. They can't literally invade and change that forcibly like they're trying to do with Ukraine. So these themes, integral to Estonia's modern national identity, are falsely rebranded by the strategy document as the glorification of Nazism. Do you see a parallel? This is what they're doing in Ukraine. This is why this article is super interesting and important, because actually what the strategies that Russia are doing here, what they are, is entirely what they're trying to do in Ukraine, except with the added, war. So yeah, it's that is Nazism. And in fact, if you go and read, you have to read or listen to On Ukraine, On Tyranny and On Ukraine by Timothy Snyder. But the On Ukraine part of that talks so much, and I know I've really sung its praises a lot previously, but it's such a phenomenal audiobook. And his account of how Russia deal with the idea of Nazism is absolutely fascinating. Anything that is anti-Russian is Nazism. Even, anti-Nazis are Nazi if they're anti-Soviet. And but it's how that has been nurtured as this kind of approach for an awful long time. And such a good book. Anyway, to continue, Estonia's decision to remove or relocate Soviet era World War II monuments is part of this, but it caused riots back in 2007 by ethnic Russians, perhaps encouraged from abroad. And that then led to a massive cyber attack against the country, which temporarily crippled Estonia's expansive digital commerce and banking sectors. They were orchestrated by the Kremlin and malicious gangs, and then seized the opportunity to join in and do their own bit to attack Estonia. But what's interesting is, again, that has backfired. So now Estonia has since grown into a cybersecurity powerhouse, including in eastern Ukraine. Its foreign intelligence service, Met, is considered to be one of the premier collectors of signals intelligence, or SIGINT, or communications intercepts in NATO. Wow. And in fact, the bulk of Estonian society has only grown more inhospitable to Russian influence operations. So the more they try and do these sort of things, and the more obvious it is that it is Russian nefarious influence, the more it kind of backfires. Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania have also since barred the entry of Russian citizens, including those fleeing conscription following Putin's mass mobilization order in September. Now, this has been criticized by some people because these are people running away from Putin and the Kremlin and mobilization. So the theory is we should be saying, "Oh, well done for running away from that. Welcome into our country. That's fantastic." But the flip side to that, there's several counter arguments. One is that just because they're running away from mobilization doesn't mean that they disagree with the war necessarily. So it's more about self-preservation. The war's a great idea. Well, I don't want to go and fight in it, so I'm going to run away to another country. But they can still be a shield for Kremlin politics. But also just that Russian influence into these already very delicate cultural, political cauldrons like the Baltic nations, having suddenly a whole tens of thousands of Russian people being thrown into that, ethnic Russians, then that balance is going to be in favor of this kind of Russian identity, and would only favor the kind of outcomes that Russia's looking for in these kind of strategic documents. Anyway, as it continues here, safeguarding Estonian national security, that becomes a problem for doing that, for safeguarding Estonian national security. Quote, hosting a few 100,000 military-aged men, aged 18 to 35, I'm not so sure that's a good idea for any country so close to Russia. Is one quote. So a medium-term goal of these documents is increasing Russian exports and bilateral trade and foreign direct investment. This plan was clearly based on the relationships that were burned by Moscow's war of aggression against Ukraine. Stoking pro-Russian sentiment in Estonian society and within the political and military elites is listed as an ever-present goal throughout all three periods. So is limiting the influence of nationalist elements and creating new public associations with non-governmental organizations that promote cooperation with Russia. Quote, it's the same thing that Russians have been doing for 30 years, Tuomas Hendrik Ives, the former president of Estonia, told Yahoo News after reviewing the strategy documents. What strikes me is the same out-of-touch understanding of the reality of Estonia evinced already with the invasion of Ukraine. They just don't understand what's happening in our country, or in Latvia or Lithuania for that matter. This is absolutely bang on. And they didn't understand what was happening in Ukraine. They just totally miscalculated Ukraine. They'll welcome you with open arms and bunches of flowers and flower petals. No, they won't. They'll welcome you with a javelin shot up your arse. Now bugger off. So, it's how can you miscalculate that badly? How can you get your intelligence, the FSB or the GRU or whoever, how can they get it so badly wrong? Is it a case of Varanyo, of this kind of, BS going up and up and up the hierarchy of command, that no one's willing to tell the truth because you're just telling the person that you're speaking to what they want to hear, so that in the end, someone like Putin, who's making the big decisions, just has a plethora of BS from which they have to derive some kind of sensible decision. oh, let's invade Ukraine because apparently they all love us. And they all speak Russian, and that means they're basically Russian, right? Okay, let's do it. What do you mean that none of them want us to be there, and they're fighting us? What? You're sacked. All of you are sacked. So, per the documents, a short-term goal for Estonia is the quote formation of new public structures, foundations, NGOs, and NGOs advocating cooperation with the Russian Foundation. Another short-term goal is working, quote, with Estonian businessmen to explain the Russian Federation's readiness to open up Russian market to them, provided that Tallinn changes its foreign policy to be more pro-Moscow. Of course it would. So it's getting entrepreneurs, businessmen, people, these agents to do lobbying on behalf of Russia, whilst at the same time fostering separatist sentiments in the Russian regions and creating such sentiments among representatives of Finno-Ugric peoples living in Russia. So this is it says here, one of the most bizarre objectives stated in the Estonia strategy is a counteraction of Estonia's alleged efforts to foster separatist sentiments in the Russian regions and to create such sentiments among representatives of Finno-Ugric peoples living in Russia. So it's kind of like as if, Estonia is really concentrating on causing that much trouble in Russia. But so Russia are going to try that in reverse on Estonia. But as it goes on to say, or a senior Estonian intelligence official says, this is the stuff of Russian fantasy. It has zero correspondence to reality, but sounds like something they'd say because it's exactly something they'd do and indeed have done in Georgia, Moldova, and Ukraine. So 3 countries where Moscow has fostered independence movements among Russian-speaking minorities. I mean, this is just out their playbook, right? So the strategy document for Lithuania talks about the short-term project of stopping the, quote, build-up of the military presence of the United States and other NATO member countries on Lithuanian territory. A medium-term follow-on strategy is preventing the, quote, deployment of medium-range air defense missile systems integrated into a single NATO air defense system and reducing the, quote, number and scope of NATO's operational and combat training activities in Lithuania. But a large swath of that has already happened. Basically, massive failure. And as we come towards the end, so Latvia has long been a notorious hub for Russian money laundering, with banks being the gateway for billions of dollars of Russian wealth entering the European Union. Yet this access to Western markets is now also closed, thanks to the Latvian authorities' shuttering of the dirty banks, and more recently as well, the Western sanctions due to the war. Quote, the current objectives in Latvia, said the Latvia Intelligence Service, SAB, are to divide the Latvian society as much as possible, promote tension and dissatisfaction with the state authorities, create contradictions among Western countries to make unified decision making difficult, so on and so forth. I think that's a fascinating article. Go and read the whole thing. I've only taken bits and pieces out of that. I hope I made some kind of coherent sense. But what you're seeing is an approach that, yes, we've seen with their Belarus and Moldova documents, but actually what we've seen with Ukraine and how they approach Ukraine in all the ways other than the outright war. This is their approach to pretty much all of their international political interference, I guess. Anyway, there you go. That's far too much of me talking. It was a long one today. I don't have time to finish with the rest of it, but hopefully that was of use. Please like, subscribe, and share. Appreciate all the support. Thanks all to the members, new and old. You are all legends. Really appreciate it. Take care. Toodle pips.